Hi, I'm Holly with Stella Quilts, and today I want to talk to you about picking the quilting pattern for your quilts, as well as choosing your thread color. So we'll start with picking your quilt pattern. The main thing to remember with choosing a pattern for your quilt's top is that once it's done, all you're going to see is the texture that comes over the whole thing. So don't overthink it. But here are a few tips for making a decision. First thing I like to think about is, who's the quilt for? Am I making it for someone special? How much do I know about that person? And can I do something in the quilting that's going to speak to them individually? For example, our son is a guitar player. All the music that you hear in our videos was written and played by him and recorded. So if I was to make him a quilt, regardless of what the piecing is on the quilt top, when I go to do the quilting, I'm probably going to look for something that's very musically oriented, whether it's music notes or actual guitars in the quilting, and kind of put that in as a special little message to our son. If you have something like that, that it would be a wonderful thing to do. Other things to think about are whether you prefer curves or whether you prefer very geometric, sharp-cornered designs. That's very personal preference and just depends on what you want for the quilt. If you have a quilt that is very geometric, like this one, where it's a bunch of pinwheels, you might want to do something a little bit more curvy to soften up those sharp edges. This particular quilt was done with an all-over design called Clover. So it kind of adds a little softness to the finished product when it's done. This quilt was done with quilting called Aloha, which looks very much like plumeria flowers. Again, a soft, curvy quilting design against more geometric angled piecing. You also can use quilting that kind of brings you back to what the fabric actually has on it. So this fabric has a lot of like paisleys and some leafy designs. So when I chose the quilting pattern for this, I went with one, I can't remember exactly what it was called. I think it's Florentine, but it has a very paisley, leafy design to the actual stitching, which kind of mirrors into the fabric of the actual piecing. This quilt is a bunch of stars that have been pieced together. So when I did the quilting on this, I chose to use a star meander quilting design, which just complements the stars of the piecing. So there's a few tips of what you can do when choosing your quilt design itself. Now let's talk about thread. When choosing which thread color to use on your quilt, go ahead and pick a bunch of colors that are either within the prints that you're using or that have complementary or contrasting characteristics. So I've pulled a few out for the quilt that I've got loaded on the long arm right now. And you can see this gray blends nicely with the blue. You can't see it on the background. It's going to blend right in with the green. So if I want something that's going to blend, this is going to be a good one. It's called Silver. I've also got this yellow. It shows up more on the blue, but it blends really nicely in the background and it blends really well into the green. So because it pops out on the blue, I probably will not use it for this quilt, but depending on the quilt, I might actually choose to use something like that that has a little bit of contrast. And then there's this other color here. Got a few different options here. One thing to remember too is that the thread looks different when it's rolled up on the spool. So always make sure you pull out a strand of it and just lay it across, because that single width is going to look different against the fabric than the whole spool will. And that one's pretty good for this particular quilt. Overall, so far, I think I'm going to go with the silver on this quilt just because I do want something that blends really nicely and just gives me some texture. If you're working on a quilt that has a lot of negative space, a lot of background, you may want the thread of the quilting to actually show up more and have a more prominent role in the finished project. And that's when you would want to pick something that's got a little bit of contrast or a little complement to the fabric. Just remember that you're going for something that has beautiful texture, and just decide whether or not you want the quilting to have a focal point of the project, or if you want it to just recede back and let the piecing be the focal point. And that's just a choice that is personal preference and project specific. Just a couple more things to note, that while you're picking your quilting pattern and your thread, depending on what your backing fabric is, that quilting pattern may show up really nicely on the back and give it a nice pop from there. So here's what that star meander looks like on the back of the quilt, and the aloha on the back of this quilt. And they just, because the thread color is the same in the bobbin, but the backing fabric is very contrasting to the front, it has a nice little pop to it, and you can see it nicely. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this and this was helpful to you. Please join us next time. Until then, happy quilting.